Welcome, everybody. This is the second informational webinar about the Climate Change AI Innovation Grants Program. Thank you all for joining today. Let's get started with some introduction to what Climate Change AI is. We are a global nonprofit organization that catalyzes work at the intersection of climate change and machine learning. That includes a number of different kinds of work. We maintain and build a global community and network of stakeholders from many different communities, from public and private sectors, from many different areas of work. We guide impactful work through educational resources and programs. We fill gaps in infrastructure, such as funding, which is why everyone's here today, tools and data sets, and we advance discourse and advise relevant players in thinking about the space, shaping decisions and policies regarding it. Some of our specific activities include, obviously, the grants program that you're here for today. We provide a large number of digital resources for those interested in the intersection of climate change and machine learning for a number of different communities. So for researchers, we have a foundational report called Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, many ways to interact with that, including interactive summaries on our website. We maintain tutorials on various of the subjects touched on in that report. We also have a wiki, community-driven wiki online that provides a sort of living repository of information about the field, including data sets and additional resources. We run conferences and other events, including our workshop series at machine learning conferences like NeurIPS, ICML, and iClear. And we have a summer school, of which applications are still open for more weeks. This is the second round of our summer school, which will be a mixture of virtual and in-person in Montreal this year. We run different funding programs, of which our Innovation Grants program is the main one. We partner with other organizations on different kinds of funding programs. We maintain a global community and resources for that community to engage with one another and network, including our community platform online. We also have a monthly newsletter with updates about data sets, about papers, about jobs, about funding opportunities, other things one may wish to be aware of within the space, and a blog as well. We have webinars about monthly, virtual happy hours every other week, and reading groups and other kinds of meetups for the community to engage and learn from one another. And we facilitate policy discourse in a range of ways through reports like our report for the Global Partnership on AI, GPAY, and events at venues like the UN Climate Change Conference, the COP. So with that as an overall overview of the organization Climate Change AI, let's dive into some details about the Innovation Grants Program specifically.
Hi, so I'm very happy to introduce you a little bit more about the Climate Change AI Innovation Grants Program. This will be the second year that we are doing this Innovation Grants Program. And just to start with a disclaimer, so we have had another webinar in December, and this is the second webinar. So this we aim to provide as much information and to answer all your questions as much as possible. But please have a look for most updated information at any moment. We will update the website. So if you ever wonder about something, then please go back to the website and check that first. How this will proceed in terms of a webinar. So you can submit your questions in the chat. You have the video that is turned off for you, but we want to protect your privacy, and this recording of this webinar will be afterwards posted also on the website, so you can go back to it anytime you want. You can, of course, also address us in that email, grants@climatechange.ai. So if you have any questions that are still unanswered after this webinar, so you can send us an email afterwards. Like I said, this is the second year that we do Innovation Grants Program. The first cycle from last year, we are happy to have been able to fund 13 grants that went to, in total, 55 institutions and to 14 countries around the world. You can read a little bit more about whom and what we funded on our blog. I will share a link in the chat. And as you can see also here, we have funded a variety of different sectors. Anything from power, agriculture, material science, transportation, ecosystems, and biodiversity. So we are very diverse in our application areas that we want to fund. A little bit more about Innovation Grants Program 2023. That's what you're here for. The structure of the program remains roughly the same. We will fund up to $150,000 per proposal for projects that last 1 year. The total of the funding pool that we have for this year will be 1.2 million that will go across all projects in total. So we are very happy and thankful to our supporters, DeepMind and Quadrature Climate Foundation, and our fiscal sponsor, Future Earth, who support that program in particular. The scope is the same as last year, so we will fund research projects at the intersection of AI and climate change. I will tell you a little bit more about that. And also in terms of eligibility, principal investigator must be affiliated with an accredited university from OECD member country. I will tell you a little bit more about that also in the next slides. Something important to consider is that the proposal submission deadline is March 1st. So that's an important date if you want to submit your proposal. You can do that. We use CMT platform, so you can use that link that is here and also on our website to submit your proposal. And if you have any questions about your idea and your project, whether this is applicable, anything else that you want to ask us, you can contact us on our email. A little bit more about eligibility. So like I said, the PI must be from an accredited university from OECD member country. There are, however, no restrictions about who the PI can partner with. So that excludes all partners of the lead institution, which must be from the OECD member country. All partners can be from anywhere else in the world, so it does not have to be OECD countries. Unfortunately, industry research labs and national labs and institutes are not considered eligible, so it must be a university. Like I said, there are no restrictions on co-investigators, and no aspects of projects should be funded by any other funding bodies. You can see also a list of the OECD member countries here, and also on the OECD website, and on our website also there is a link. Something else I wanted to share here is that the funding can go in the who we fund is the OECD university, member country university. But afterwards, the funding, the lead institutions or the university can decide how those funds are dispersed. So there is no restriction in that. We cannot, however, fund anybody else outside of that leading institution, the university.
Yeah, and just to address a question in the chat, just because it's very relevant to the slide. So there's a question asking, does university exclude non-degree granting publicly funded academic research institutions. So yes, unfortunately, a non-degree granting publicly funded academic research institution does not fall under our definition of university. And as a result, such institutions can't be the lead institution on a proposal. That said, again, there are no limitations on co-investigators. So such an institution can be a co-investigator or a co-institution of the proposal, where all funding would go to the lead institution, which is a university, and then any subgrants to other institutions would be managed by the lead institution.
And private organizations, like companies, are also eligible as subgrantees, and they can get funding. Just we transfer the funds to the lead institution. The lead institution can then subgrant according to however it wants to, if that has been listed in the proposal. There are a couple of other clarification questions. National Academies of Sciences, unfortunately, are not universities. They also do not count as a lead institution, but any institution can be a subgrantee. So if there is a lead institution that you are able to work with, that is completely fine. And there is no limit on how much funds goes to the lead institution versus to the subgrantees. Should we answer the other questions now here quickly? These are on to the first one because it's related. Are doctoral students in OECD member countries eligible to be the PI? Anyone who is eligible to be the PI according to their lead institution is eligible from our standpoint. So check with one's institution whether you are eligible to be a PI on a grant.
The next point is also related to this slide, so I might go ahead and address this one. And then, yeah, for the rest of the questions, we'll get to them at the end, as Camelia mentioned in the chat. But one question asks about no double funding. What does that mean? Is double funding of a sub-project okay? So basically, as we say, no aspect of a project should be double funded. So you shouldn't be getting funding from two different sources, for example, for the same salary or the same part of a project. That said, if your overall project has multiple funding sources, that's fine. This is just to make sure that basically the funding, any funding that comes into the project is actually funding that project, and it's identified which parts of the project are being funded by which grant sources, and it's not that the project is in some sense getting overfunded and then that money is going elsewhere. So definitely it's fine to have projects that have multiple funding sources. It's just that each particular budget, each particular expenditure should be asked for from one particular funding source. Okay.
Right. So we will continue with what we are funding with those grants. So in particular, potential topics. What is relevant is anything with machine learning, AI, and climate change and mitigation, adaptation, or climate science. So in your proposal, it could also be or AI governance in the context of climate change, or assessment of greenhouse gas emissions, impacts of AI and AI-driven applications. In your proposal, you should address how your work will be deployed to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So I'll tell you a little bit more about this in the next slide. Like I said, we are very broad in terms of application areas. So anything that is relevant to climate change and AI at that intersection can be relevant also for the grants. But this year in particular, you can request additional funding from a DeepMind engineer. And this, you can do that if your project proposal is focused on using AI and machine learning to address climate change mitigation in the electric power sector in particular. So you can do that. You can request that through the CMT forum. There is the question that will pop up, and then you can say yes or no whether this is relevant for your proposal. A little bit more on the dataset requirement and IP. In addition to conducting research, all proposals or project must propose a new dataset. So that dataset must catalyze additional work in climate change in various sectors. Like I said, it must be compliant with the fair data principles. So those principles are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. You can see a little bit more in the link on the website also. What is very important and what we look for is the creation of a data set and by creation, we are very broad in our understanding. So that may mean including annotating data and labels, that may be collecting new data, that may be stitching existing data from multiple sources, creating a data simulator, models, and so on. So creation of data set can be quite broad in that sense. If you ever have a doubt, you can send us an email and we will respond to that. All grant IP must that is produced, so whether this is through a model, simulators, descriptions, and so on, they must be made publicly available under an open license. So this is an important requirement from our grants program. And the idea of that is that it catalyzes further work in that area. So that is one of the main objectives for the grants, innovation grants program in itself. In the next slide, you will see the timeline. So important date here is, like I said, March 1st. This is when we expect the deadline for all proposals. After the deadline, we will review through a single blinded process, and then you can expect to hear from us in terms of results by mid-May. Meanwhile, you can start the project around August 15, and then that will be for a duration of 1 year. So that 1 year is not a hard call, but if your project must continue a little longer, we can discuss that also. But in general, within 1 year, you must prove a certain results already that have been achieved. Evaluation criteria. So what we consider while evaluating your proposal is, well, the first and foremost, climate relevance. So it must be relevant to climate change, mitigation, adaptation, climate science, or governance in the context of climate change. So another criteria is that is AI and machine learning relevant. So anything that is sound and appropriate method, so that does not necessarily mean that it's a fancy method in any way. The dataset quality, of course, and the impact is very important, and project pathway to impact. So we one of our evaluation criteria is to have a direct impact. So the better you can explain that pathway from project research to impact, the better, the higher chances there are. Ethics. So proposals should explicitly discuss ethical consideration and implications of their work. This includes discussion of relevant stakeholders and equity considerations of the problems that are addressed, but also scope of potential negative social and environmental impact of proposed solution. a little bit more about that, you can see on our website, there is a link to the NeurIPS ethic guidelines. So those are not exclusive, but still it will give you a very good idea of what ethical considerations you should have. Of course, we consider the expertise of the team. So whether they are experts and specialists in the area that they are working on, in the projects that they are proposing, and we'll be evaluating that. What, in addition to our criteria, we will be looking for, we are considering favorably in terms of deployment partners. So, like I said, the lead institution must be from OECD country, but that does not exclude in any way any kind of partners from all around the world. So deployment partners can be from the private sector, from government, research institutes and labs, national labs. It can be non-governmental organizations. So it can be really very broad in that sense. We would prefer to fund traditionally underfunded areas of work, and we consider equity in our evaluation. The budget. So in your proposal, you must include a budget that describes your projects. So we have provided a template that you can use, or you can download it here, you can download it from our website, but you can also use your own budget if you have. It must be itemized, so you should explain what and how, what are you going to use those funds for and how. A brief budget justification. Eligible expenses include salaries of PI and research staff, equipment, expenses associated to conferences and travel, travel trips, also field trips. The overhead is a maximum of 10% that you can request, and that is a 10% across the entire budget. So it includes the PI institutions and all its partners, all deployment partners. Allocation, so the lead institution can allocate the funds in any possible way they want to their partners or subgrantees, but funds will be solely dispersed to the lead institution, so in that sense, the university. Yep. How to submit? The deadline, again, is on March 1st. Applications can be submitted through the CMT website. You can see on our website as well. A link, it's a fairly simple process, so there are questions, and you just answer the questions and submit your project. You should prepare the following items. So those are basic information about the PI and team. So this is in terms of your resumes and expertise. The first name in the CMT will always be treated as the public investigator, principal investigator, and the project description should not be more than 12 pages. So if you exceed that 12 pages, you are immediately considered not eligible for the program. So please stick to that. Same order and headers to separate the subsequation of given on the website. And you can, for our ease, but also for your, if you prefer, you can use our budget template, but it is not obligatory. If you have any questions about or any problems when you want to submit, feel free to send us an email. This is on the next slide. You see how what the submission looks like. So if you connect yourself through the CMT website, there are a few questions, and then it's fairly simple. If something doesn't work with the submission, or if you have any doubts or any questions in particular about your submission, your projects, your team, feel free to send us an email and we will respond. And with that, I want to open also now the rest of the presentation of the webinar will be for questions, for addressing your questions in the chat. So now also feel free to send us more questions, anything in particular that you want to be addressed.
What questions do people have? It looks like there was a question from a little bit earlier in the chat. To what extent is the funding for basic versus applied research? Does the idea have to be totally new or something that's nobody has ever done before? So we do not require there to be innovations in the machine learning that is being used in a project. It doesn't have to be some new algorithm. It can be used in a new way. It does have to have an innovation of some kind. The innovation could be in how it is being used. It is not going, we're not going to award a grant to work where the work has already been done, clearly, but it can absolutely be applied research rather than basic research.
There is also a question about the 12 pages, whether that includes figures, references, etc. So yes, it does.
Or sorry, it includes figures, it excludes references. Yeah, it includes figures, but excludes references.
Figures should be in line. There shouldn't be like an appendix with figures. Don't rely on some appendices.
Can some of the funds be used to buy equipment? Yes, if the equipment is needed for the research of the project and you can justify it, yes.
And similarly for field data collection.
Yes.
I think before that, there is a question on governance. So with the governance topic, are you only interested in regulation as a form of governance, or could a project look at other forms of AI governance? AI governance broadly is in scope.
When generating a data set, is there a need for implementing AI algorithms, or will generating that new data set be sufficient? I'm not sure that I understand the question. The data set doesn't have to necessarily use AI to create it. Many of the data sets might be collecting or labeling a new data set that can then be used by AI algorithms. It doesn't need to be using the AI algorithms to create the data set. Let me know if that doesn't answer your question.
Amelia, would you like to take that question about governance?
So the question, I will read the question first for people, is what about climate, also about governance and policy, what about climate negotiation mechanisms? Say we have an idea to improve the mechanism by which agreements on climate mitigations are reached, would that qualify? So yes, we also accept broadly anything in relation to governments and policy and in the field of AI and climate change. So that would qualify. And about the next question also, should the project be exclusively on Microsoft platforms? If it chooses other platform, will that be frowned upon? So our submission process is through CMT, but you can use any platform otherwise to do your research and to work on whatever you want.
We have no affiliation with Microsoft.
No.
CMT is the standard submission platform for machine learning research venues in many cases. That it's just a tool which is maintained by Microsoft. You do not have to use Microsoft tools in any
way. Can we resubmit one of our latest paper publication and push the idea further? So does that mean that you want to submit, you have submitted for the first innovation grants program and then you want to submit again? The answer is yes. Have you submitted a paper somewhere else and you want to submit it here? Yes, if it applies to, if it qualifies under our eligibility criteria.
You can't, obviously, like submitting a paper is different from a proposal. You're going to have to rewrite things considerably, and you can't obviously be funded for work that you have already done. But yes, it can build upon an existing publication that you have. If that is, we're not sure we're answering the question, but hopefully that does. Nicole mentioned several priority areas. If a project addresses several of these, should we pick only one as the main? I'm not sure what the priority areas are. We mentioned example areas. These are not exactly priority areas. The form on the submission site should indicate a way to pick areas. So that will give you the guidelines for how you can pick areas. That's for review processes. The exception to sort of, in some sense, priority areas, the eligibility for that additional DeepMind research engineer is something where there are priority, it's not a priority area, it's the only area that is eligible for that additional DeepMind support.
So the next question is, can collaborators appear in more than one application or in one application as a PI and another as a collaborator? So you are allowed to appear in multiple proposals, but we'll note that we are across the set of proposals looking to feature a diverse set of topics, institutions, and so forth. And so do keep that in mind if you are participating in multiple proposals.
The other question, would the entire cost of equipment be funded, or would depreciation be counted as well? It could be counted as well. So yeah, write down in your project proposal, in your budget, the entire cost of your equipment that you need and depreciation. And
I think the question was, are we subtracting the cost at the end of the project from the cost that we will fund? You don't have to take that into account. You don't need to like sell back the equipment or account for the value at the end of the project. That said, if you're buying equipment which is barely used during the project, that might certainly be considered during evaluation. So if you are buying a piece of equipment that is only peripherally relevant to the project and is mainly going to be used for other projects, that might affect the evaluation. But no, depreciation is not something that you need to account for.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers the question. I'm not sure if one of us answered it.
The next question is the funding 100% or will organizations have to self-fund it all? So there's no cost sharing requirement with this grants program. So you can just, take the funding without having to cost share or find funding from another source to match it. There are, overhead restrictions. So the total overhead across the entire project budget, so that includes the lead institutions and any sub-grantees, the total overhead can't exceed 10%. And so that may have implications at your institution that you would need to check with But from our side, other than meeting the 10% overhead requirement, there aren't any other things like cost sharing requirements that you would need to take into account.
More questions? There have to be more questions.
The titles of the projects funded last year are published on our blog, so you can find them on our website, and also we have a series of blog posts that present each and every one individually. So you can also find that through our social media, but also on our blog post. In the link, you see the announcement of the blog posts. Of the funded, the winners of the innovation grants from last year. The projects we funded last year was also with the same budget, so that will be 150,000 per project, roughly. There are some small variations here and there, but so that is the main. So that remains the same, yeah, for this year.
And maybe a related question to that is, so projects can request funds up to 150,000 USD per project. We are not using the project cost to decide on the quality or fundability of a project. So we suggest that you request what you need, and if that is the full 150K that you request, that there's no sort of strategic benefit to requesting less than what you need if you indeed need the maximum.
Though if you request more than you need and that comes across, that will not be considered well, to be clear. Is it okay for us to work with governments around the world? In general, yes. As a US-based nonprofit, we are legally required not to engage, even by proxy, with certain governments. That is following US law. But in general, working with governments is permitted, even encouraged.
And building off of that, as a
US governments would
not
be, for example, Iran and North Korea, but there are others as well. I don't know what the current status is of US law.
The other thing is that as a US nonprofit, we cannot, even by proxy, engage in political lobbying or lobbying for particular political candidates or the passage of certain laws. So kind of interacting with policy processes, providing advice to policymaking processes in general is fine, but any kind of political lobbying is not something that we can fund.
On the question of limit for budget that should be allocated to the research staff, or number of research staff that there is a minimum, maximum. So there are no requirements in that sense. The only thing to consider is that 10% is the maximum of overheads that we can have, we can grant, but otherwise you can participate with as many research staff as you want, as long as, of course, you can justify, their salaries and all of that. Can a project start later than planned, like a few months later than August? We are flexible somewhat in that. So we aim to start around August 2023 and finish within 1 year. So August 2024. We can discuss, however, if you want to start a little later and accommodate to that.
Should the project have a link or interaction with DeepMind? No, is the short answer. DeepMind is only potentially an option for those projects within a certain area, a focus area for DeepMind. B, the idea is that we are offering an interaction with DeepMind. You do not have to come with that interaction with DeepMind. We are offering it. You don't even have to opt into that. It is a bonus that you can use if you want. to help advance your project. But it's certainly not something that is required for you to, you shouldn't have already set up a relationship with DeepMind or anything like that. It's something we offer to a grantee if they are in the relevant area.
Yeah, and to add to that, none of the funders of the Innovation Grants Program, so the funders of Climate Change AI for the Innovation Grants Program, so that's Quadrature Climate Foundation and DeepMind, none of them are involved in the evaluation or selection of proposals. So the proposals are all selected by Climate Change AI based on the criteria discussed in the webinar today and on the website, which include, again, their relevance to climate change, the applicability to AI, feasibility, all of the criteria that Camelia went over earlier. And so having an existing collaboration with one of our funders will not be a consideration in the evaluation of the project. The project should, advance climate change related goals. And as David mentioned, kind of any collaborations with our funders are sort of offerings that we're creating. They're not used in the evaluation of the project at all.
To the question, can the project be shorter than 1 year? So the grant is for 1 year. You can use it for less if you want to and achieve those results in shorter timeline. But yeah, we encourage you to use the full amount of 1 year all the time to get the best results of your research.
With respect to the governance and impact related projects do not have to submit data sets. Would it still be desirable if they have some sort of open source output or outcome? First of all, they're not necessarily exempt. If there is a relevant data set, the criteria are that the rule is that they may be exempt. Now, it's more a situation of if there is no relevant data set that could be made available, then you don't have to release it. But if there is a data set that is being created, then it has to be made publicly available. In fact, all of the grant IP has to be made available. So the open source output or outcome goes for everything funded by the grant, not just the data set. But for governance and impact related projects, we recognize that sometimes there won't be a relevant data set. And so it's okay if in those cases, there isn't a data set made explicitly available. We expect that the vast majority of projects will make a data set available. And some of the projects in that area will as well. And in all projects, the grant IP has to be made openly available.
In terms of the principal investigators, is it more attractive to have earlier career, or are you looking for senior experts to be holding that role? So what we're evaluating in essence is the project proposal more than the people behind it. So if your project proposal is very strong, you can go with either person for public principal investigator.
And we're looking for an expertise match between the team and what they're looking to do. So it's more important to have a good expertise match regardless of the seniority of the person.
And regarding the project end dates, if the data set you're collecting is supposed to cover 1 or more years, you should still, however, publish results within that 1 year. So this is the main requirement, that within 1 year, you should have some results published, and then you can continue with collecting even longer than 1 year if that is your project.
Yeah, so to clarify that further, so by the end of the 1 year period of the grant, you need to have a plan for your releasing your data or simulator or so forth. So we over the course of the year, you should be making research progress and reporting that to us through the grant reports that you'll be asked to submit. And by the end of the year, you should have a plan for publishing your data set. And the data set should be published by within a year after the grant end date. So we understand that collecting data can take some time. And so that there is some buffer for the actual publication of that of a year after the grant end date. But by the end of the year, you should have a plan for the publication of the data.
Can UN organizations such as UNESCO or WMO be included as partner collaborators? So yes, they can. You can include as partner collaborator anyone from government, intergovernment, private sector, non-private, public, and so on sector.
Can the projects be focused on one particular country? Will this affect in some way the project's final evaluation? We can't guarantee that, like, impact is certainly one of the ways in which a project is evaluated, but it can certainly be focused on one particular country, or in many countries, or in the entire world. It is completely eligible on all of these, for any geographic area of impact.
And you can see this by looking at the sort of titles of the projects that were funded last year. There's a wide range of geographic scopes that the different projects represent. And so we have no preference on the specific size of the geographic scope that you address. It is really about ultimately the impact of the project. It's tied to deployment partners, its pathway to impact, various things like that, which will look different at different geographic scopes.
The geographic scope can also be different from the geographic scope of the relevant institutions, though it certainly may be advisable to include partners from the geography of impact, but that is, it may be advisable.
Any other questions?
And to round that out, also, if the project is focused on a particular country, that doesn't have to be an OECD member country.
Right. And yeah, and in fact, if you again look at the last year's grantees, you'll notice that some of the countries or areas of focus that are listed are indeed not OECD member countries. So emphasizing that we really are open to different geographic scopes being addressed. The kind of restriction of the lead institution to universities and OECD member countries is purely legal and logistical.
Last call for questions. Okay, well, you are welcome to, oh, sorry, there was one more question.
So yes, the budget can fund salaries. So you should include those salaries of the principal investigators, research staff, anyone involved in the project. You should include it in the budget. Just to remind you that if we have not addressed your question, or if you think of something later at one moment, you can always email us at grants@climatechange.ai.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. And we look forward to seeing proposals from many of you.